Thanks for joining us here at the Experian Curated Couch at CES 2026. I'm joined here by a panel of experts to talk about healthcare, marketing, advertising, and activation. I'm Scott Koza, Vice President of Product at Experian. Why don't I go ahead and introduce you guys?
Ted Sweetser, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at PurpleLab.
I'm Stephen Heroyan, Senior Client Partner and Ad Tech Strategy Lead at Datavant.
And I'm Gabe Richmond. I'm a GM of Data Partnerships at the Trade Desk. The Trade Desk is the largest global independent DSP or media buying platform for advertisers.
Well, thanks guys for being here with us today. Let me start off with, I'm going to ask you sort of a sentence like, what's the big opportunity in healthcare right now? And I'll throw some numbers out just to start with to give people sort of a sense. US ad spend this year, $25 billion, 13% year over year growth. Social, $6 billion, that's 18% growth. And then on the B2B side, really the healthcare professionals and healthcare organizations, that's grown by 11%. It's outpacing other verticals, not the biggest vertical, but it's outpacing them. What's the biggest opportunity PurpleLab sees right now in the advertising space?
I think that the biggest thing that we see as an opportunity is the flattening of the plane between all of these different media channels, which means for, like last year being the year of outcomes, as everyone kept calling it.
Yeah.
This year we are actually able to find ROI against each one of those. So I think that means growth overall for the whole space, but a lot of shifting of budgets as we're able to finally appreciate the incremental contribution from every channel on a single layer.
Actually, dovetailing off of what Ted mentioned, flattening of the plane is an interesting way to describe it, but also I think that the catching up of pharma and healthcare as a vertical has happened. Mm-hmm. For so long, healthcare and financial services were sort of thought of as lagging behind, and they're not anymore. So the art of the possible is real, and when you're incorporating the right privacy by design and incorporating the right partners and connectivity, the sky's the limit.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And just to build, so as a DSP, the opportunity then becomes you can essentially reach and activate against patients, find them where they are across virtually any channel, screen, or device. Same thing with healthcare professionals. Doing that at scale with privacy built in by design, respecting consumer privacy, working within the regulatory frameworks that we have to abide by. But just like you said, we are rapidly realizing opportunities and capabilities in healthcare and life sciences, marketing and advertising that other categories have had for quite some time.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing, right? Is it's finally this space is catching up in a way it hasn't. With that, it's a sensitive category nonetheless, right?
Extremely.
Let's talk a little bit about like what's in bounds, what's out of bounds. Like what is, let's start with Datavant. Like what has changed, right? That's allowed sort of this to be in place, and what are still sort of out of bounds components for advertising in this area?
So much more is inbounds than what we had previously thought, and that's thanks to experts in the room who are ensuring HIPAA compliance and regulatory compliance, but also it's not just the HIPAA checkbox. Through the different partners incorporating regulatory frameworks into their own platforms, that really enables so much more to be inbounds.
Yeah, all the sort of safeguards along the way across all the partners.
Compliance isn't something that only happens once.
Right.
It's a governance mindset throughout the entire workflow from end to end, from audience modeling to activation to measurement.
And for PurpleLab, how about you guys, right? Like, where do you see sort of the components that sort of allow this to really function and activate the way it is for advertising today?
We've seen phenomenal growth in the last few years, really in the media space. I go back to two things. It's the scale that cloud computing has enabled, combined with the privacy frameworks that Datavant and has facilitated, such that we can build out these huge de-identified data sets and then use them to construct models and understand the real world so much better, and the digital media ecosystem, I should say, rather, so much better.
And I'm sure Trade Desk has, you guys within your platform, you've opened up more capabilities for this. So how do you guys think about, this space and what's allowed?
If there's a a PHI risk, if there's a re-identification risk, I mean, that's data that we don't want, and work with our partners to ensure anything that we receive, is at the very least de-identified, if not, de-identified and then modeled, to your point. And so when we're talking about patient activation, like that's how we think about it. It's de-identified audiences, it's modeled audiences, and we are activating against pseudonymous advertising IDs as opposed to anything that you could ever sort of map back to to an identifiable individual. That firewall between a real world persona, your offline PII, the information that you give to the doctor's office, that's got to be a one-way street into digital where you can kind of never traverse back into that, and we take that incredibly seriously. But then also from like an HCP standpoint, we're opening up capabilities there as well, where we've got the ability to target healthcare professionals based on job title, role, things like that, and then even down to the MPI level, but making that available as a ID to onboard and activate against. Really a full breadth of capability to influence potential patient outcomes, but also the providers that are treating them.
Let's talk a little bit about sort of the flow, right? From sort of the pre-planning with Datavant, like with tokenization, PurpleLab being able to build off of audiences, the ability to send that to Trade Desk, and then the measurement sort of feedback loop. So, I mean, I think if we think about that from just the linear nature, like I'd love to just sort of hear from you, like how does it start with the tokenization, and then, for you to sort of dive in with how you guys are building the audiences and constructing them, how they get into Trade Desk, how you guys feed the feedback loop from not only targeting, but then the actual measurement piece.
HIPAA has a very strict definition of what de-identified means. And that's one of Datavant's specialties, is bringing together or enabling the bringing together of disparate healthcare data sets in order to power different use cases, but in a de-identified manner as certified by what we call an expert determination, which is one of the true certificates that goes along with making all of this possible in the healthcare space. We enable the bringing together of all of that data, we de-identify that data, and then isn't passing the football over to someone like a PurpleLab. That's where you all pick it up.
We leverage Datavant to create these baseline data sets that allow us to understand construction of patient populations that match a given criteria. And that's incredibly valuable actually before even the audience stage. So, we're working with brands that are shaping their RFPs at the front end of things to understand patient populations that match the criteria for different stages of the patient journey. You think about treatment for like a Rinvoq or a Humira or something like that. That's not necessarily always a first line. Certainly some of these drugs can be quite expensive. So you're trying to understand how many patients are there at each of these different stages of identifying something's wrong, getting evaluated, going to a specialist, which is where the HCP angle becomes incredibly important, and teasing out like what are the common characteristics of them. And that's where big data and cloud computing have come in really helpful, which is the development of machine learning models that can look at a wide array of demographic characteristics. Geo and gender are two of the more common ones.
Yeah, and then I'd say obviously we're partners with Datavant as well, and being able to be in that space and have our identity set tokenized and be able to then take audiences from a PurpleLab, move them into an identity space we're familiar with, and then pass them downstream to you guys. But I would sort of love your piece on like the activation and then the sort of the feedback loop.
I mean, there's a lot that's happening way upstream, like we just sort of talked about here, to make sure that the audience we receive is compliant and something that meets industry guidelines, but also Trade Desk platform policy. Then advertisers are setting up campaign to activate against those audiences. As media is running, there's various optimizations that are happening in flight to tune to different sort of definitions of audience quality from like a pharma standpoint, but also other quality measures, like we have a QRI, quality reach index. Maybe it's not a very specific target. Maybe you want to reach a broad demographic, but still you want to understand what is the quality of the impressions that we're serving against a seed audience that we're activating against or tuning the campaign against. And so those sorts of things are sort of happening in flight, optimizations to drive to the best result. But then we're also, and this is kind of core to the Trade Desk DNA, we believe that the marketers, ad exposure data, the ad logs, I mean, that's their first party data as well. And we want to give that back to them and empower them to bring that in-house, leverage a, analytic partner of choice. And so, we still get to an end state where we're helping them, enabling them to measure outcomes, in this case, measuring script lift, seeing if media exposure led to a visit to a doctor and eventually to a procedure or a prescription fill or things of that nature.
On the trade desk, what are some of the key things they're really sort of evaluating for quality?
Yeah, and so, audience quality, while it may have a unique definition for each advertiser, that is a standard sort of concept in healthcare advertising. And so in the old world, that sort of happened outside of our platform. It was the only place it could happen. And so, there was the ability to optimize against audience quality, but it was, your optimizations were fairly delayed. Your time to value was just based on, how long it took for data to come out and optimizations to be tuned and the next activation to occur. But we've since brought audience quality, or AQ, into the platform. We have a few data providers that are feeding that. And so now that's running alongside the campaign at the ad group level. And so a pharmaceutical advertiser leveraging the trade desk and looking at AQ reporting can actually have our COA AI co-pilot optimizing the campaign with them in real time based on the audience quality scores that are coming back. And so, gives you the ability to tune to specific data providers that may be driving better performance, specific segments within those providers, specific inventory sources, so on and so forth, right? But that now becomes a fluid part of the campaign for more dynamic optimization and much faster time to value.
You talked a bit about, you hit on HCP, so healthcare professionals a bit. Obviously, sort of a critical component is reaching the consumer, but then reaching the professionals that play in the space as well. NPI, or National Provider Identifier, is a critical way to sort of identify those groups. Talk to us a little bit about, people have shifted away from just using context or site-specific, location targeting to really being able to reach those healthcare professionals. They're finite, but they're high value and they're really critical to pharma success.
Yeah, and so what happens today now is we essentially accept the NPI as an identifier that can be onboarded to the trade desk. And so advertisers can upload a list of NPIs. We essentially have a way to map those NPIs to, pseudonymous, digital identity for those HCPs. And so the NPI comes in, but when it comes to then activation, we're finding those people not only on, endemic websites where they might be browsing professionally, but also where they would be consuming content as a consumer. And so the opportunity to, reach the professional, not only when, when they're in their role, but also kind of when they're at home or on their commute, now we can sort of influence them throughout their day, throughout their journey, and kind of, as we said at the top, right, bring that sort of capability that we've had at the, at the consumer standpoint, or even other B2B channels, right, to healthcare that's now natively on the platform.
And for PurpleLab, how do you guys continue to think about reaching healthcare professionals? Obviously, they're at the NPI, but then you also have ways to connect into doctors as well, and really make sure you're getting in front of the right healthcare professionals and supporting the brands.
Yeah, so all of these capabilities with being able to light up, healthcare practitioners with information at the right time are incredibly vital in that patient journey I referred to earlier, when it's understanding, that a patient is about to go into a acute episode of care where, awareness of tools or information about, a medication that could be helpful to their condition are incredibly timely. And being able to tie that back together through, the PLD, the physician level data, and then unify it with the claims data, which, also has NPI, a National Provider Identifier, on it, allows you to actually understand, whether or not that intervention, say, made them aware of market access tools to make medications more affordable to a patient, or made them aware of a new treatment, or research finding that Humira got its 23rd indication approved, and maybe it's right for this patient with, say, RA or something like that.
Yeah.
If I may, it's really easy for us in the industry to get caught up in 3-letter, 4-letter acronyms and abbreviations.
That's ad tech, right?
But at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're building a better informed patient population that can then help provide better patient care, better patient outcomes. And this is all very, very powerful stuff when done properly.
I mean, we're coming into a year where I think 1 in 3 states or something like that has seen significant insurance premium hikes. And the model that we have here in U.S. healthcare is, the patient needs to be advocate for themselves.
Absolutely.
There's a somewhat adversarial system with the payers. And, we want to provide all of the tools necessary to make sure patients are aware and able to make their voices heard.
I think that's a critical component, is making sure people are aware and they know what's out there. They can be educated, they can advocate for themselves, and really walk into their doctor and healthcare professional and really sort of talk to things that they might need.
Yeah.
There's been another change that sort of occurred. The Trade Desk has sort of led a change that's going on. Historically, I mean, you know this very well, a lot of audiences were sort of custom. They were private, they were built, they were shipped to private seats. Trade Desk is really you guys have recently opened up more of your health marketplace, really sort of removing a lot of those restrictions, being able to help advocate. Talk a little bit about that, and then would love you guys to weigh in, especially PurpleLab, with the benefits you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, and there's of course still a place and a value in custom audience creation to meet a specific use case, right? Now we have the ability to kind of put audiences syndicated on the shelf and let an advertiser come in and discover and select. Talking time to value again, right? Like your ability to then just kind of test things, iterate, find success, move on, go to the next one, right? Like your ability to just activate and measure and understand and evolve with speed when you're talking about things that are on the shelf and in the marketplace is just so much faster than the old world where we were kind of had to work within the confines of only custom audience creation. And again, like still support, of course, custom audiences, and we think that's an important business, but we're now also sort of democratizing access to this data at scale that we didn't have before.
The use of different audiences is really, putting a question forward, which is this the best tool for me to accomplish, my given outcome? And historically, custom audiences, well, they're like works of art or ships built by hand. You can get something very good. It doesn't necessarily always fit perfectly. And my solution has always been, let's try 10 different audiences, which is why we've built audience building platforms that allow people to go and experiment with a whole bunch of different builds simultaneously and ship and really hit media 6 different ways and see what has the highest AQ performance and go with what works. Don't just bet on one. Let's actually go through this the same way that you would with a creative A/B test.
Yeah.
And like AI and large-scale automation have totally made that possible. So I always encourage people, don't just take one of our audiences, try 3 and see what your highest performance is.
I think closing that feedback loop quickly sort of helps people continue to iterate as well against that. So exciting year ahead, right? It seems like this is going to be a big year for healthcare with everything that's going on. What do you see next 12 plus months, 12, 18 months out? What's on the roadmap? What's coming? What's in the next? What is innovation is going to occur inside of healthcare?
Datavant is a network node business, and we're nothing without our partners. And being able to work with partners that are removing barriers to entry and enabling a democratization is really exciting, because that brings speed to that feedback loop, speed to value, nearing real-time enablement on healthcare analytics, measurement, and optimization. This is something that was unheard of, even just a few years ago. I think that this is the direction that we're going. Also making strides in a deeper understanding of the privacy frameworks within we can work. Part of that is because they're always a moving target, but also having partners that lean in on privacy as an enabler, as opposed to thinking about it as a last check at the end of a workflow. So that speed to value is happening, and it's only going to get faster.
Yeah. Ted, how about you?
Mine is who gets to be a data analyst. And that is, I can write SQL because I learned it on the job because I work with databases, but the average media planner probably can't, code, doesn't have an IDE downloaded on their computer. So when they want to understand, if I got 50 million rows of media exposure back from the trade desk, what does it mean? They got to run to someone, and again, at most companies, these are small groups of people who have these skills to interpret it. Our goal has always been to, remove that obfuscation, which is why we just launched a self-service measurement tool. But I think the MCP protocols that are being laid out by, all of these AI companies are effectively going to mean that way more people are able to hold data accountable and to make those measurements and optimizations and changes than there had been previously.
Outcomes are going to be driven more than anything by the input. Like the better the input, the better the output. In other categories, if you think about like the first-party data ecosystem, sort of like the shift from like cookie-based platforms into more customer data platforms, CDPs, you're seeing folks in other categories building single view of the customer. Single view of the patient is really complicated because, of course, you have to work within HIPAA compliance. You have media exposure data that's based on cookies, mobile ad IDs, things like UID2. You have claims data that are based on PII, PHI, and being able to actually connect all of that back, as well as other marketing channels that aren't media, connect that back, resolve through a Datavant tokenization or similar, where that can all be joined together and have a complete view of the patient across all those different touch points. Like, we're just really starting to see folks do that well. It's a really complicated use case, right? For some obvious reasons, but I think for those that start to really lean into that, figure out like how to do that within privacy compliance, partner with folks like that are on this couch, and build those sorts of more complete patient views, then you have a much more robust data set to feed models to model against and to activate in platforms like us, which will drive better performance. And so I think that's a great opportunity for this year.
Yeah, everything you described, it has clinical implications, it has commercial implications, and it has patient care implications, which is really exciting.
And it's bringing all of these groups together to make it all happen, which is exciting. With privacy at sort of the forefront for sure. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great CES. Appreciate your time joining us to talk about this.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you so much.
Thanks.